All right. Hello and welcome to class. Hope you guys are doing well today. I am obviously not here, but we are going to continue with our scheduled exam preparation today, looking at the multiple choice portion of the exam devoted to writing or editing questions, is really what they are. Okay, so yesterday we talked about the reading questions. Today we're going to talk about the writing questions. All right, and I just want to point out that all of the information that I'm going to be referencing today, including the multiple choice practice test, is available to you on RenWeb. You should have a hard copy yesterday, all right, and I should have told you to bring it back to class today, and so you should have it. But if you don't have access to it, it's available on RenWeb. All right, so I want to start by just describing some of the basic details of this test, and then working through a few practice questions, questions 25 through 32, about this draft right here is what I'm going to be working on. Okay, so to remind you of the basic structure of the test, the multiple choice section as a whole is 45% of your overall score on the exam. Okay, so it's less important than the free response section, but you can't pass the exam if you just completely blow off the multiple choice and don't try at all. Okay, you want to do well on the multiple choice. Okay, and there are the multiple choice is divided into rhetorical reading questions, which we talked about yesterday. All right, it's kind of about like half the test, and then writing or editing questions, which is kind of the other half of the test. And there are three sets or three passages for the writing questions. Okay, that basically means that there are five total passages in this test. It's 60 minutes long, so you have around 50 minutes per passage, give or take, right? Some might take you less, some might take you more, and you can use your extra time to go back to particularly difficult questions or puzzling questions that you've left to come back to, and you check your work at the end there, or work right up to the buzzer, whatever. Okay, so something about approaching the passages, right? How can we approach these passages? Well, I don't know how you do it on the SAT or the ACT, right? But I would highly encourage you, in the context of the AP language exam, to follow the sort of procedure that I'm about to model for you. Okay, I really think that it is best, right? And people from the College Board agree, the people who wrote this test, that the best way to approach this is to read and annotate the whole passage first, in an effort to understand the passages, right, or the drafts. Basic purpose, right? It's kind of logic and structure, right? What each portion of the passage is doing, and its sort of stylistic commitments, right? Is the passage ironic or satirical, right? Does it have a kind of humorous tone, or is it, objective? Is it a piece of scientific reporting, as the draft that we're looking at is? If so, the language within the text needs to sort of fit into that discourse. All right, and the editing choices that you're going to make need to make sure that there is something called stylistic cohesion in the text. All right, as you read the passage, you should be sort of making notes, literal or mental, hopefully literal, like annotating. Looking for discrepancies in the text, right? Looking for maybe discrepancies in style, right? A certain word choice or a sentence that just doesn't fit. Maybe take note of that, or holes in the logic or line of reasoning. Maybe a thought lacks a conclusion, lacks a transition. Maybe there needs to be more context provided to understand a certain observation, right? You just need to make sure that you're noting discrepancies in your initial reading of the passage. Okay, so don't spend forever reading the passage, but do read it conscientiously and annotate in an effort to understand its purpose, its logic, its structure, and style. Okay, so how do we approach the questions after we've done that? Right? How should we approach the questions? Well, most importantly, if there's anything that I would tell you, most importantly, it is to scrutinize carefully what exactly the question is asking and pay attention to the language of the stem of the question, because that's going to help you guide your editing choices. All right, so like the choices that you make need to or the editing choice that you choose needs to align most closely with the language of the stem of the question. All right. Um, that's how you should approach your choice making, right? What choice aligns with the stem of the question most closely? Okay, can't emphasize that enough. As you make choices, it's wise to sort of plug in your potential answers into the text to read them within their context, especially if you're, making an editing choice about a word. Make sure you read it in context, or the addition of a sentence. Make sure you read it in context. Prioritize generally concision and clarity. If there's a choice between a really wordy response and a shorter one that communicates a similar kind of idea, and they're both sort of grammatically coherent or correct, go with the more concise one. Okay, concision is always a kind of priority. All right, and finally, don't grow weary of making rational choices. If there is anything that students do on this exam that really just sinks their multiple choice score, it's just giving up, getting tired, and giving up. All right, you're probably not going to get all the questions right, and that's fine. That's not exactly the point here. But if you're consistently rationalizing each one of your choices, like you're scrutinizing each choice and you're making the choice that occurs to you as the best one, you're deploying the process of elimination, then overall, you're probably going to do well. Okay? Overall, you're probably going to make more right choices than wrong choices, though you might not make all right choices. Okay? So make sure that you just don't grow weary of making rational choices. Okay? So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to model a reading of this passage, and then think through some responses to a number of questions. All right. And this is going to take longer than it would take on the actual exam, because I'm going to be verbalizing all this stuff instead of just thinking it right instantly in my head and annotating it briefly and moving on. Okay. I don't want you to imitate the length that it takes, but I do want you to sort of imitate the conscientious, deliberate reading that's going to go on. Okay, so let's start with questions 25 through 32, which is about this passage. It says, read the following passage carefully before you choose your answers. Okay, so let's just do what the test says and read the following passage carefully, annotating it and trying to make sense of it as much as we can. Okay, so the latest findings in social psychology suggest that self-knowledge is a more complex phenomena than you might think. Okay, psychologists Jesse Sun, maybe, and Samin Vaziri, probably, at the University of California, Davis, have shown that while people offer accurate self-assessments of many individual traits, they tend to miss when they're being rude to others. As it turns out, knowing what your personality is generally is not the same as accurately discerning how you are behaving in the moment. An important distinction. All right, so this is the sort of general concern being introduced in this text, right? Is this complex phenomena of knowing yourself with respect to how you are being perceived or coming off in the moment, all right, as opposed to what you are generally like as a person, what your interests are, or how you fancy yourself, or whatever. Okay, so teasing out this distinction is what this passage, what this article or whatever it is, essay or piece of writing is trying to do. Okay, so according to Sun and Vaziri, self-knowledge can be divided into trait self-knowledge and state self-knowledge. So maybe like knowledge of your traits, what kind of person am I, and state self-knowledge, how you are in any sort of state of being at any one moment. In other words, knowledge of your own characteristics as opposed to knowledge of how your personality fluctuates from moment to moment. Okay, and this is pulled from obviously the language of maybe the study that the writer is drawing this information from. So it's in quotes. Sun and Vaziri conspired on an experiment to study the latter category. In other words, knowledge of how one's personality fluctuates from moment to moment. The study's experimental subjects were equipped with audio recorders that would automatically activate every 9.5 5 minutes during the day, recording 30 seconds of audio at each activation. Okay, so this sounds like my worst nightmare. But there's a word choice in this series of sentences that's just kind of weird to me, right? Like this word conspired. Okay, that sounds like they're like evil or something like that, conspiring on something. It has some kind of negative connotations. It doesn't really fit in to the style of the passage as a whole. And I'm kind of noting that and thinking, maybe that just doesn't really fit in. Recording 30 seconds of audio at each activation. Participants completed self-evaluations at certain times of day according to several different personality measurements: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. End of paragraph. Transition into the next sort of block or chunk of the text. What did this block or chunk of the text do? Overall, it gave us a kind of background of the study that Sun and Vaziri did. Its narration, its background, okay? Now we're going to get into something a little bit different. That's what this paragraph signals to us. We're going to get into something different. The self-assessments and ratings of objective observers generally aligned, okay? Well, now I'm a little bit lost because I don't know who these objective observers are. It feels like I'm missing a little bit of context that perhaps ought to have been added to this background narration paragraph. Okay, so again, a little bit of a discrepancy or some sort of thing that is maybe missing that I'm noting here in my initial reading. But Sun and Vaziri noticed some major differences among different categories of personality traits. Participants often reported feeling more neurotic, which is to say anxious or worried, right? This parenthetical element that is obviously modifying the word neurotic than the observers believed. However, there were even larger discrepancies between observers and subjects' assessments of agreeableness, okay? A description encompassing qualities like warmth, friendliness, and tact. In other words, the people watching the subjects were evaluating how warm or agreeable the subjects were being very differently than the subjects themselves were, okay? In other words, right, evaluating one's behavior in a moment, in the moment, is a little bit more difficult than we would assume. Sun and Vaziri saw how these results, saw these results as remarkable, given that agreeableness might be expected to be a more obvious trait. Okay, so that concludes the sort of analysis or description of what it is that Sun and Vaziri observed in their study. So this paragraph, right, its narration, its background, it describes the study. This paragraph, what does it do? Okay, it describes or analyzes what Sun and Vaziri discovered in their studies. All right, what might be missing here, what is missing here, is a kind of concluding thought that links, all right, what it is that Sun and Vaziri saw to this sort of central claim that, of course, discerning how you behave in any one moment is a little bit difficult. Of course, that is suggested here, but it isn't explicitly stated. Could the paragraph be improved by explicitly stating it? Yeah, well, yes, it could. Sun and Vaziri argue that the study underscores the importance of state self-knowledge in ordinary interactions since, quote, being aware of and able to do something about your disagreeableness in the moment might be more useful than knowing that you are generally a disagreeable person. These facts make it obvious that everyone should behave accordingly. Okay, so the final sentence here is a little bit strange in its sort of tone and style, insofar as it is just so absolute. All right, it makes it obvious that everyone should behave accordingly. All right, that might be just a little bit too absolute for this very measured and seemingly objective piece of writing. Okay, so let's get into the questions. Let's pay attention to the language of each one of these questions and see if we can't make some reasonable editing choices. All right, shut up, people. All right, writing is the writer is considering changing the beginning of sentence 1, reproduced below, to better introduce the topic and engage the reader's attention. Okay, so we want to better introduce the topic and we want to, and this is a really important piece of language here, engage the reader's attention. All right, so what is the most engaging choice? What is the most engaging editing choice? The latest findings in social psychology suggest that self-knowledge is a more complex phenomenon than you might think. Which of the following versions of the underlined portion of sentence 1 best accomplishes this goal? What is the goal? To engage and to introduce. All right, as it is now, okay, well, that's option 1. Know yourself is a well-known maxim, comma, but the latest findings in social psychology suggest, and then we plug that in, right, that self-knowledge is a more complex phenomena than you might think. Okay, I like this option because it leads with a sort of engaging maxim that sort of everybody is aware of, and it also points out a kind of distinction between what this sort of well-known maxim and what the latest findings in social psychology are suggesting. Okay, so that seems like a pretty good option. The latest findings in social psychology, a field that reflects what people have written about the human mind for thousands of years, are now suggesting. I don't like the verb tense here. I don't like this massive sort of a positive phrase going on here. I don't like the reference to thousands of years. Social psychology is not a discipline that has existed for thousands of years, although perhaps contemplating one's internality has. Many people would say that self-reflection is an important habit, and the suggestion from the latest findings in social psychology is right, and we plug that in. That self-knowledge is a more complex phenomenon than you might think. Okay, I don't like this option because it lacks the antithetical or contrasting transition here that is denoted or communicated by the word but. Okay, it uses rather the word and. Social psychology is a constantly evolving discipline, and its latest findings suggest. All right, this is actually a relatively difficult question. I think it's the hardest one of the set. But the correct answer, right, the best option, if you couldn't tell in my description, is B. All right, B. Know yourself is a well-known maxim, right? It is what? Well, it's engaging. Why? Because it engages with an audience or the audience's well-known maxims. All right, or a well-known maxim that they might be aware of, and then it establishes this sort of contrast between what we all sort of assume about ourselves, that we know ourselves pretty well and can kind of accurately evaluate ourselves. It contrasts that with the latest findings of social psychology. It introduces the topic and it engages the reader's attention. That is the best choice. It's the right choice for question 25. Again, a little bit of a tricky question. I don't love that one as much. It's not quite as clear as the other ones. All right, so let's move on. All right, question 26. The writer wants to avoid revealing any potential biases in sentence 5, reproduced below. Sun and Vaziri conspired on an experiment to study the latter category. Which of the following versions of the underlined portion of sentence 5 best accomplishes this goal? As it is now, no. All right. In fact, we already noted that conspired on is just kind of a weird word choice in general, right? It's got these like sort of evil, dark connotations to it. Dreamed up, fabricated, threw together, designed. Clearly, the word choice that is the most appropriate for the kind of writing that's going on above is designed. All right, designed. Okay, that's what researchers do. They design experiments, right? They don't conspire on them. They don't dream them up. They don't necessarily fabricate them, although that's probably the closest and best second option. And they certainly don't throw them together. They design them. Okay, so I think we could probably all agree that designed is the best choice. All right, let's look at question 27. The writer wants to add a sentence after sentence 7 to expand on the narrative in the second paragraph and provide additional context for the third paragraph. Okay, so narrative here in this context, of course, means background information. Okay, not story like it would in a sort of fiction writing. Okay, narrative means background, and the stem of the question even clarifies that by saying provide additional context. Okay, so what option helps provide additional context? Well, we got to go back to the sentence to make our best choice. Participants completed self-evaluations at certain times of the day according to several different personality measurements. including extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. The self-assessments and the ratings of objective observers generally aligned. Okay, so again, in my initial reading, I noted that these objective observers, right, weren't introduced to me. Okay, so what option does the best job of providing all the context necessary to understand the sentence that follows sentence 7? These self-ratings were then compared to the assessments of researchers, okay, who listened to the subject's audio recordings. Thus, option B, the study required over 9 years of work by the researchers. Okay, so does that fit in between sentence 7 and sentence 8? Okay. No. Okay, perhaps that would have fit in earlier when the background of the research was being described in general, but it certainly doesn't have anything to do with the specifics of how the research was undertaken. It took the researchers a long time to transcribe data from the audio recordings of the subjects. Again, that's disruptive. It's a detail that is not necessarily relevant for contextualizing the information that follows in the third paragraph. Messier and Sons test subjects were mostly students at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Again, doesn't provide context to help us understand who these objective observers were. Messier and Sons graduate advisor at the time of study, although they was Sons graduate advisor at the time of study, although they co-published the results. Okay, so again, a kind of unnecessary detail in that context. Maybe not another one, but in that context, yes. So what's the correct answer? Well, the best answer is, of course, A, right? Because it introduces these researchers, these objective observers, and what it is that these objective observers were doing, which was, of course, comparing the self-ratings of the subjects, that they were tasked to observe. Okay, so again, A makes the most sense. All right, let's do a couple more, and then I'm going to turn you loose, and you can finish the practice exam alone. All right. The writer is considering deleting the underlined portion of sentence 10, reproduced below. All right. Participants often reported feeling more neurotic, all right, dash, it's a parenthetical element, anxious or worried than the observers believe. Should the writer delete the underlined text? Okay. Does this not belong? Is it unnecessary? If it does belong, why? All right, let's choose the correct answer that is that's presented for us in the options. Yes, because it distracts from the focus of the paragraph by introducing irrelevant details. All right, are these details irrelevant? I would say no. Right, they actually help us define what it is, what the word neurotic means, which for your reader might be helpful. Okay, yes, because it reveals the writer's biases and may therefore affect the audience's acceptance of the overall argument. Again, no. Defining neurotic as anxious or worried is just a denotative definition. That is not a biased definition. Yes, because it introduces a shift in tone that is not consistent with the language used in the rest of the passage. Okay, again, no. These descriptions are perfectly in line with the overall tone and purpose of the passage. No, because it offers information that may be helpful to the audience in understanding a potentially unfamiliar term. Is neurotic a potentially unfamiliar term? Yes. What does this language do? What does this parenthetical element do? It just modifies what this word might mean. Okay, so D is the answer that makes the most sense, right? So you want to make sure in these yes, 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 or yes because, no because, that you're not only choosing the first word that is correct, but you're also choosing the rationale that makes the most sense. And no because it offers information. That's the rationale that makes the most sense. Okay, it does not support an emotional appeal that the writer is making. Okay, so that's not a very good choice. All right, the writer wants to add the following sentence to the third paragraph. Sun observed that this is understandable since subjective feelings of unease are not necessarily apparent to others. Okay, the question here implies that you need to link this is to its referent, right? And it would naturally follow a sentence that defines what this is, or what what it is. So where in the passage would this sentence fit in most naturally? Okay. Well, if we go back to the passage, all right, we need to remember, right, before sentence 8, before sentence 9, before sentence 10. Okay, so if you look at your passage, all right, uh, uh, let's read the third paragraph. The self-assessments and ratings of objective observers generally aligned. But Sun and Vaziri noticed some major differences among different categories of personality traits. Participants often reported feelings more neurotic, anxious, or worried than the observers believed. However, there were even larger discrepancies between observers and subjects' assessments of agreeableness. All right. So, what is the referent of this sort of understandable lack of correspondence between their observations? Well, it's referring to the feelings of anxiousness, right? Feelings of unease, those neurotic feelings. Okay, so where would this sentence fit in most naturally? Before sentence 11, after, which is to say, after sentence 10. Okay, wherein the neurotic feelings are introduced. Okay, so again, we're just making sure that the sentence fits into the place that makes the most sense in the passage as a whole. All right, so I'm not going to talk you through any more of these. I think you get the general idea. The most important element that I hope that you're seeing as a pattern in these questions is paying attention to the language of the stem. Okay, pay attention to the language of the stem, especially on this first question. What is the most engaging introduction here? Right. So this option, it's I don't even know if it's super engaging to me, but it certainly is the most engaging, and it helps introduce the topic by introducing the fact that this maxim is at odds with the latest findings. That's kind of what the document is trying to communicate. Generally speaking, we want to pay attention to the language of the stems, right? Revealing any potential biases. What words are biased? What words have connotations that are perceivably negative? Conspired is one, of course. Dreamed up is another. Fabricated, a little more neutral, but still not as good as designed. Threw together, very negative, okay, and inappropriate. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the language of the stem. We want to make sure that we're plugging in potential answers into the text. We want to make sure that we are noting discrepancies in our initial reading and then resolving them in our editing choices, okay? So that's enough. What I'm going to do now is just kind of sign off and leave you to finish the writing portion of the exam on your own. And then you can pull up the multiple choice key, all right, and use it to check your answers, okay? If you're not getting a whole bunch of them right, don't get discouraged, okay? Simply, locate another practice test, which are easily available online, and keep practicing, okay? The most important thing you can do is to not grow weary of making rational choices, making rational editing choices, reading with a sort of deliberate, conscientious consideration for clarity, logic, style, and purpose. Okay, so we can do this. You guys are really smart, and you're going to nail this on the exam. Okay, have a great day.